Invicti Security presents AppSec Serialized, a podcast about web security and those who practice it. Episode 5, CISO on the Seesaw. Alice and her team at Helix Co. have been pushing hard to get a major new feature out, an 80% rewrite of the front end, rebuilding the old server-side pages into modern web components communicating over GraphQL. It is a lot of code to push out, but if her team pulls it off, it will be a major feat, from janky to swanky. Alice is the lead developer, and after several days spent resolving merge conflicts, she's now a little crunchy. One of the juniors on the team had gotten a little overzealous on the feature branch. Some hotfix had been made on prod, and she herself probably shouldn't have redone the bits that talked to the backend at the same time as the backend crew was revving their interfaces. It all took longer than it should have, but they made it into orbit. Automated tests were all green, and even the dreaded executive demo didn't result in last-minute demands to tweak major functionality. All they had to do now was land that reusable launch system and push it live. She could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Shipping the code was going to feel so good to finally have it live and in the hands of actual end users. Just had to get through this change review board meeting. This was something new, and as far as she could tell, some kind of formality. Something about FedCramp compliance or some other box checking. She was daydreaming about adding another Easter egg to the project, a personal signature that would only be viewed when a dev opened up the JavaScript console on her site, maybe a way to recruit talented new front-end personnel when she heard those terrible words.
Alice, I think you're on mute. Can you let us know your thoughts on that?
Uh-oh, busted. There were like 20 people at the meeting. Looking at the virtual meeting attendee list, nobody else was named Alice. Oh no. Worst case scenario, play it cool, probably just a formality.
Sorry. I think my network dropped for a second. Can you repeat the question?
The voice was familiar, but someone she didn't talk to that often. Her eyes scanned the attendee list, looking for who lit up. Ugh, they had a C in front of their title.
Yeah, this is Bob. I was just saying I don't see a record of your new project being scanned in our ASPM.
Uh-oh. A quick Google of ASPM revealed that Bob was talking about an application security posture management system, like a big place to record all the security scans of different types. Alice looked back mentally. Had she missed an email on this?
So we sort of have a problem here. Apparently you didn't put one of the total protection scripts into your CI/CD pipeline to, scan your code during development.
Alice desperately tried to think of a convincing and original explanation, and failed.
Oh yeah, sorry, we forgot. We've been cranking to hit the deadline.
The excuse fell flat.
Yeah. Well, you see, we're now doing scans on all the code before it goes out, right? You did get the email, yeah?
Oh yeah, sure thing, but we're shipping tomorrow, so we can do it right after the release. It's no problem.
There was an awkward silence.
Yeah. Well, if you could just go ahead and follow the process from now on, that would be great. My team will take it from here, and maybe you guys can ship during the next change window, yeah? Okay, everybody, we're up on time, so thank you. Good meeting. Alice, a member of the AppSec team will be in touch with you. We're a bit backlogged, but should take no longer than probably, 2 weeks.
The meeting ended, and the white glow of the shared project board was replaced with a dark mode UI of her conference software. Alice caught a view of herself on the shiny laptop screen, a face tired, with eyes as red as the lines and the diffs that she'd been reviewing over the past few days. No, this would not stop her. She was going to ship. If they wanted a scan, then they'd get one. She started looking for that email about the new security process. Oh, okay, that was a lot of emails. In her defense, she had been busy. She logged into the DAS tool. She had never used it before, but it was pretty easy to set up, point at the staging site, and give it the test credentials they used in automation. Now, to wait. It was probably going to take ages. She looked back at the progress bar, inhaled sharply, and blinked rapidly. Done already? Had she been napping? Whatever. It was time to look at the results. Oh no, that was not good. The tool was not happy at all. It showed a long list of high-severity cross-site scripting alerts. Not in her new code. Well, okay, except a couple of, easily fixed ones. But in the stuff that they had refactored and shuffled around, exposing cracks that had been previously paved over by another layer of code. But there were so many, there's no way that this could be correct. Alice clicked on the proof URL at the bottom of the tool, expecting some security BS write-up lecturing her. But it took her to the app, where her cookie was still fresh and allowed a login, and it popped up an alert box? Uh-oh. She went back and clicked another one, another pop-up. That simple gray box spoke directly to her core as a developer. Arbitrary JavaScript was being executed in her shiny new app. Ugh. Alice was crestfallen. She wasn't going to ship after all. She wanted to scream, to blame someone, to curse the old code that her beautiful masterpiece had been built upon. Her other monitor was still mercilessly showing that email from Bob. By shifting left, integrating into your CI/CD pipeline, scanning as we build, we can find and fix issues before they become a crisis at the end of the release process. Ugh. Soon her taut IAM client was lighting up with automated deployment messages from all of the other teams. The trains were pulling away from the station, and she was left standing in the dark and cold on the platform. If only they had scanned earlier. If only. Hello and welcome to another episode of AppSec Serialized. Today we have a very special guest who is joining us. We have Matt Sciberras, who is a real-life actual CISO. Matt is our CISO here at Invicti Security. Matt, can you introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Dan. Thank you for the introduction. Indeed, I am Matthew. I'm the CISO here at Invicti Security. I live in a tiny island called Malta. I've been here for 43 years. Yep, I'm 43 years old. And for me, security has been always something which was an inspiration and something that helps me wake up in the morning knowing that I'm doing something good and giving something back.
Excellent. And for the record, Matt, as a CISO, is a joy to work with. So he's a good guy. Matt, for those of us, for listeners who, maybe are more on the practitioner side of things, what exactly would you say you do here? What's your day-to-day life as a CISO? Can you describe for our audience a day in the life of your role?
Sure. So, of course, no day is the same day. However, in reality, what we do as CISO is that we align security with business objectives. And how we do that is quite important because we want to be here to minimize risks as much as possible and also enable the company to take calculated risks as well. So I try to focus on a North Star. We essentially have different percentages where I try to put myself in on a day-to-day basis. Like, for example, 20-30% I look at strategic planning. The idea is that I want to be in a situation where I am looking at long-term security initiatives. I want to align security with business goals, and I want to develop as well security roadmaps. And that is kind of, the fulcrum of everything, right? When it comes to information security, strategic planning is extremely important. Then half of my time, around 50%, I would dedicate it towards day-to-day operational activities, such as vulnerability assessments, compliance, incident management, and the like.
Yeah, keeping everybody safe.
Yeah, that's the idea, right? And you unfortunately end up having knee-jerk reactions during the day as well because you will have instances which are unplanned, and you need to be on the ball and dynamic as you go along. Unfortunately, in regards to meetings, the ideal is that you have around 20% of your time. But we all know that is a big lie. 20% is not something that is ever achievable. But I'll try as much as possible to have time for the rest. And in fact, the last thing that I would focus on is research and development. We want to understand what are the evolving cyber threats that are around us, the emerging threats that there are. And of course, I'd like to understand as well, day in, day out, new security technologies. I think this is all very important because, we need tools. You need to understand as well what is around you.
Excellent. Yeah. And that strategic element, one of the things that I benefit from your team is some of the intelligence reports that you guys will occasionally put out saying, what's going on, what's kind of the buzz on the dark web about things. So it's interesting, right? Balancing kind of the reactivity versus the long term, I think is pretty key.
It's extremely important, Dan. I mean, at the end of the day, we are online. We're also an AppSec company, right? And we want to be world class as much as possible. So we strive and we make sure that we have a maturity program around all this to ensure that we have the right security posture.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So, seeming that we are a AppSec company, and this is essentially an AppSec podcast, I'm going to grab the reins here for a second, and I'm going to ask a question that I think everyone out there wants to know, especially if they're listening to a podcast like this and or their CISO duties are having other areas of focus. Now, one of those areas of focus for you, Matt, is without a doubt application security as a whole.
Correct.
I'm just curious for yourself, or maybe some advice for others out there, as a CISO and from the CISO level, how would you describe your ideal AppSec program?
Sure. That's really obviously one of the key fundamentals in having a good security posture. And in fact, we focus around three major pillars, which is people, process, and technology. I always start off with looking at a framework, a go-to place. It doesn't really make sense, or it never made sense to me to kind of, grab different frameworks and try and do your own. I love following the NIST 800-218. It's a great kind of set of standards where you can actually build something which is significant in today's secure coding and all that. Essentially, you need to look at your security policies. You need to have coding standards as well and guidelines, because developers at the end of the day need to have a certain level of understanding about the risk appetite of the company as well. And of course, having this on paper is nothing. You need to ensure that you have regular reviews as well. Regular reviews to ensure that these controls that you have in your policies or else in your NIST controls are actually being adhered to. Another thing which is important, I have this is a topic which we can keep on talking forever, right? But at the end of the day, there are lots of things as well. Training developers and stakeholders. We want to ensure that developers, and not only developers, even QA teams, for example, and other stakeholders are actually trained in secure coding practices. Everyone needs to understand, for example, OWASP top 10, right? The security architecture and all that. These are all very important things that, a developer needs to know. And when it comes to all that, how do we actually teach that and how to actually create this awareness? To me personally, I think gamification is something which is really important, because developers don't really care about, they don't care about security, but, they just want to code. And I think through gamification, they can actually maybe, make that learning kind of less painful kind of thing, and they can move on to the next level, right?
Yeah. And I've said this before, is that as we have DevSec, Ops, we keep kind of putting more hats for developers to wear. So it's not that developers don't want to do security. It's just, it becomes one more thing that you have to do at the end of the day, and another hat you have to wear. So making it a little bit of fun, injecting a little bit of gamified fun into it, not a bad way to do it.
Definitely.
I have a follow-up on that. Now, if we talk about from the developer perspective, historically developers have been having core responsibilities of getting features, codes, components, those type of things out the door in a given time frame. Has there been what's your approach to incentivizing security from a developer standpoint? So if we're saying that we're shifting responsibilities from a developer to write functional code that works on time, what is that additional layer of security built in there from their perspective to say, okay, this also matters for my performance and what I'm graded on, to make sure that the code I'm writing is secure, and being able to enable that pillar specifically?
Yes, sure. There are different areas. For starters, we have lately introduced the security champions part, right? And having security champions, I think, is extremely important within your organization, because at the end of the day, you want to bridge the gap between development and security. But apart from that, of course, there are lots of tools that you need to take care of, and that would be obviously your vulnerability management part in all of this. Essentially, when you're talking about us tooling, you're talking about static application analysis. Again, it's a very important tool. It's the go-to tool because as much as possible, you want to find vulnerabilities in code early within development. Then we have our own area, which is DAST tooling, right? And for me, DAST, not only because I work at Invicti, but it's my baby, because at the end of the day, we can detect vulnerabilities at real time. And for me, that is crucial in attaining a good security posture. Then we're looking at system composition analysis. Everyone's talking about S-bombs at the moment. Yes, indeed. We need to have SCA tooling as much as possible because we want to assess third-party libraries and we want to understand what vulnerabilities are there and possibly as well licensing risks. Then if you have a lot of budget, the idea of bug bounty programs, I think that is something as well which can provide value within your organization, of course, if you have the budget for it. But I mean, at the end of the day, having these tools is not enough, right, Frank? We all know that we need to automate security as much as possible, and we need to integrate these tools within the CI/CD pipelines.
Exactly where I was going. Excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up, Matt.
And Matt, one of the things you mentioned, those three pillars, right? The people, the process, and the technology. One of the things on the people, when you incent developers, I remember we were out in Istanbul and we had kind of like a nice presentation where we announced the Security Champions program. What are little things, right, that you can do to kind of call it out as a special role, right, as an additional hat that people are wearing that is recognized?
Correct. Recognition is extremely important because people are people, and at the end of the day, even like providing merch, making them feel that extra special because they're providing value towards the organization. I mean, at the end of the day, it was really nice as well when we were handing them out. One of the people we have, an architect, she has actually volunteered to be a security champion. She actually wore the T-shirt, wore the hat, and all that, and she spent all the evening with it. That to me shows that, hey, we're doing something good at the end of the day, and people are appreciating it. And even like after the actual announcements, they actually spoke to me, on Slack, and they said, hey, thank you very much. We really appreciate this, and I'm seeing a lot of traction now. With our AppSec engineer. All this value is happening at the moment, and I think it's really, really cool.
Yeah. So it's quite physically an additional hat to wear, but one that people have been wearing with pride. So it's working out pretty well. Well done. So drilling into some more of those pillars that you identified, technology is one. And you kind of listed a grab bag of the different techniques that are out there, right? We have DAST, of course, which is very central to our mission. But you also talked about SCA, about bug bounties, about a variety of different tools. So, and you qualified the statement, right? You said, if you have enough money. So my question to you as a CISO is, we don't always operate with infinite resources, and I'm sure that many of the CISOs that are listening to this podcast full well know the challenges of trying to operate and do their best with the resources that they have. So if you have to choose, right, if you had to choose one tech pillar around which to build an AppSec program, what would you start with, and what would you expand? Like, how would you spend your AppSec dollars, and in what order on different classes of tools?
That's when the real CISO comes to play, right? Because it's very easy sometimes to throw money at problems, having all the shiny tools and all that, and have one nice dashboard with all the vulnerabilities and having all these correlations done. But if you're a real CISO, try and do that with a budget which essentially is not maybe at par to what you had in mind within your roadmap. And correct, if I had to actually choose out of all these different pillars, I think technology would be the most important one for me personally. And of course, I would go into the vulnerability management part. And vulnerability management for me, it's of course very important because we are doing a number of things. We are doing real-time risk reduction, right? We're looking at proactive and reactive risk reduction. And the idea of having continuous protection as well, because at the end of the day, you are shipping new new code in production, and essentially as well, continuously monitoring and using automation as well, you're continuously looking at your vulnerabilities and mitigating them. Of course, it covers broad areas of threats. It covers the full attack surface, I would say. Whether you're using SAST and and the combination of DAST and SCA, And mind you, we haven't mentioned other tools, right? Because there's container scanning as well. There is, IAC scanning as well. I mean, infrastructure as code nowadays is extremely important as well to monitor this, within the actual pipelines as well. Of course, tools, I mean, they're expensive, but as well, I think vulnerability management in itself is also cost effective. And the reason being because the more targets you have, you can invest according to the targets that you have. So if you have, 10 targets today and you have 20 targets next year to scan, you can, increase the licensing accordingly. And of course, I mean, when it comes to vulnerability management, I mean, there's a compliance side, whether you're looking at NIST, whether you're looking at SOC 2, whether you're looking at ISO, vulnerability management is kind of, buying milk at the supermarket, right? It's always there. You have to do it. And even if you don't care about vulnerability management, but you want that certificate, you want that compliance, you need to do it.
Yeah. So, we're, of course, a security company, so we hold ourselves internally to a high standard. But there's going to be different sizes, right? And some CISOs might be building an AppSec program from scratch. What guidance would you give to someone that is kind of taking the first step into the, the refreshing pool that is the world of AppSec? Like, what tool would you start with? How would you, what would you do first? What have you done in the past that has worked well?
So whenever I started an AppSec program, I always installed a DAS tool. And I installed a DAS tool for a number of reasons. One, because there is the divide between developers and security, right? When you are actually building that culture first, there is a divide. And for me, I think having a DAS tool where I can manage, where my team can manage, is extremely important because I can see, at least at real time, what vulnerabilities do I have and what is my attack surface within actually my applications, right? So for me personally, I would always invest in Dust first, and then after I would invest in the other tools. And I've had a lot of value within that as well, because when you're looking at Dust and we're looking at certain, applications where you have low false positives, you can get a lot of value there. And I think that is crucial.
Yeah.
And nowadays as well, there's the API scanning, right, as well, because a lot of people, a lot of companies as well forget about APIs.
Yeah. And I have to say that one of the nice things as a developer, when you start with DAST and you kind of bring your first vulnerability, right, to your development team, DAST vulnerabilities that are crits that are confirmed are typically treated very, very seriously. Sometimes if you bring like a SAST vulnerability, it can start a conversation, right? And that conversation may end up with the impression being, oh, okay, we're going to argue about this. This can't be exploited. You're wasting my time. It's a lot harder and more difficult for a SAST tool to understand the context in which something is being evaluated to know if it's exploitable. But, if you have a curl command and you can just like show it to a developer and say, look, I now have root on this machine. It's a very short discussion. So that I think helps if it's the first tool, right? It helps build credibility.
Yes. Lots of quick wins. I don't know, like, what's the word? Low-hanging fruit kind of, solutions as well. I think, if you need that kind of solution as well, from a DAS perspective, that is the way to go.
Excellent.
Matt, we're going to shift again one more time. There's something you brought up, and I think it's crucial to be able to talk to, especially from your level and broaden the audience here. But you did mention a couple of different times compliance specifically with different references. Now, let's focus on one of those. I know here internally, you've gone through SOC 2 compliance. You've gone through the processes. There's, when we look at something like SOC 2, there's best practices and there's essentially what is the minimum or what is mandated. As a compliance expert yourself, what are the actual guidelines and things that you're looking for, and how is this put into practice, and what's the most valuable advice that you would have to say, hey, look, these are challenges and things that we're looking at with SOC 2. How do I go about implementing these best practices to make sure we're achieving our goals? What can be done specifically from SOC 2 as it might relate to AppSec? But let's start with the first piece first and just go through some of the things that you've gone through internally and then some of those quick hits for the SOC 2 specifically.
Of course, SOC 2, could be a beast in its own regard. It's actually quite interesting. I mean, I like SOC 2 because it actually attests to the actual, logical controls that you have within the organization. But within SOC 2 itself, there are different trust criteria as well. And there are 5 criteria. There's the security, the availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Companies can opt to choose certain trust criteria, or else, they can choose to do all of these trust criteria. But in essence, there are quite a number of things related to AppSec when it comes to SOC 2. The first thing is that SOC 2 requires ongoing identification and mitigation of vulnerabilities. And, you have to do this in order to attest to this kind of control. And of course, something to sort this out, it would be to implement an automated vulnerability scanning and integrate patch management into your CI/CD pipeline. Another thing, for example, that SOC 2 mandates strict control over access to systems and data. What would you do over there? You need to adopt role-based access control. You need to integrate MFA. You need to have proper reviews when it comes to access reviews and all that. SOC 2, for example, requires data to be encrypted, both in transit and at rest. Again, what would you need to do there? Of course, you need to ensure that you have proper key management systems. You need to ensure that, you have proper TLS 1.2 or 1.3 passing throughout your network, right? You need to ensure that you have proper encryption at rest when it comes to actual data sitting there, in your S3 buckets, for example, and obviously in your databases. Another area is, that SOC 2 requires formal change management. You need to have a proper security checks within your change management system. Again, I'm not talking about, you need to have, cabs every week or things like that. This is not FedRAMP, right? But what we're saying here is that, there needs to be a paper trail that, hey, these changes have been done, and someone else has vetted it to ensure that it has been approved and all that, right? So obviously there are different levels, when it comes to all of these things. Why? Because security is what? Security is a maturity model where year on year, you're actually improving within your actual security infrastructure.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things, right? There's also third-party management, which is quite hot at the moment. This is actually something else which is important to ensure that you are identifying and mitigating these kind of risks. And within the AppSec itself as well, you need to have, proper SCA tooling to ensure that you can monitor these third-party components for vulnerabilities.
So, if you had advice to give to a CISO, essentially, that was going from 0 to SOC 2, and we're putting a lens on this from AppSec, what are some internal wins and things that you've done, that advice that might be given specifically for AppSec for someone who's starting this journey at 0? Is there, let's say, a specific tooling or a specific guideline or something that would be a really good place to start and build upon with regard to AppSec and this SOC 2 compliance?
Yeah, sure. I've done SOC 2 with just a DAS tool, for example. The idea is that within SOC 2 and even ISO, it doesn't state that you need to have, SAS running, SCA running and all that. Obviously, there's a requirement and you need to fill in that requirement. And DAS essentially fills in most of the requirements when it comes to SOC 2 compliance. There's also obviously the governance part of it all. Essentially, you need to start off by creating a North Star. You need to have a framework or a policy in place on how you're going to be doing this. And then you would actually work on logical controls to adhere to the policy that you actually built. When it comes to role-based access control, you need to have a procedure around this, or maybe a standard on how you're doing role-based access control, and then follow it through, not only through paper, but also within your logical controls itself. And things go on, like, third-party risk assessments. How are you doing this? How are you doing vendor management, for example? You have a standard around it, and then make sure that you have logical controls around it that actually are enforcing that particular standard that you have within your organization.
Yeah, that supply chain area has been one of definite interest and growing popularity.
Definitely. And the same way how I'm saying, we have S-bombs now has been in practice for a number of years, or close to years, I guess. I tend to think that there are AI bombs happening very soon.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Companies now need to understand hey, these are the AI, these are the models that we are using, and I feel that it will soon happen, and maybe down the line, someone will be looking at this podcast and say, "Huh, Matthew was right. It actually did happen."
Let it be known on the day of recording that
AI bomb.
So Matt, kind of zooming out for a moment, right? Chief Information Security Officer. It's a position with a heavy crown, and my question to you is: there's got to be things about the job that kind of keep you up at night. What is the hardest part of the job for you?
For me, it's obviously managing limited resources and budgetary constraints. I think that is, of course, difficult because at the end of the day, the threat landscape is increasing, and the budget either remains the same or actually gets less, right? So you need to ensure on how you're doing this to ensure that, you're using your dollar, as much as possible, in a good way. And I think that is kind of the hardest part of the job. In general, I feel that lots of CISOs can actually attest to this sentiment. So I would say that the limited resources and budget constraints would be the most difficult one for CISOs in general, of course.
And so to end on a more positive note, for you, whether here at Invicti or elsewhere, at other times inside of your career, what's been a victory in the CISO space that you have been the most proud of?
For me, the biggest and coolest thing of being a CISO is when you have company buy-in. I think that is the most important thing for your roadmap to be successful, and that is why I'm here at Invicti. There is a lot of buy-in. I mean, we're in the security space. We all speak the same language, and having a dedicated team as well. I'm very happy with my team. I love my team. And I think we're really doing really good, cool stuff here. So. Yeah, definitely. It will be the company buy-in for me.
That's a key point. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Matt, I just want to say thank you again for your time and speaking to us today. It's been a great conversation, and we hope probably to have you back on here again sometime in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks to everyone who contributed to this episode. Matt Sciberras was our special interview guest. Frank Catucci led our Q&A section. Opening Fiction was written by Dan Murphy and performed with Alexa Rogers and Zbigniew Banak. Special thanks to Megan McBee for marketing support and to Zbigniew for his ceaseless supply of creativity and production magic. And thanks most of all to you, our listener. This has been another episode of AppSec Serialized.